picture the sky over the Pacific Ocean, late September. Suddenly, the atmosphere is just torn apart by a massive high-velocity object re-entering from space. And it's not a meteor. It is a DF-41 intercontinental ballistic missile launched by China's People's Liberation Army.
Right, and we're talking about an asset capable of carrying nuclear warheads with a range of up to 15,000 kilometers, which is easily enough to strike the mainland United States.
Exactly. But here is the real kicker, the thing you need to focus on. That test, which was conducted over international waters, was the first of its kind by China in exactly 44 years. The last time they did this was way back in 1980 with a missile called the DF-5. So, the immediate question is, why now? What invisible tripwire was just crossed to reignite a hard power showdown that we basically haven't seen since the Cold War?
Well, you are here because you need to understand the underlying mechanics of the Indo-Pacific theater. I mean, this isn't just about drawing new lines on a map. It is about grasping the absolute epicenter of 21st century global power.
Yeah, we are going to unpack the treaties, the geography, the economic choke points, and the terrifying realities of what defense analysts are now officially calling the new missile age. Okay, let's unpack this. We have a massive stack of intelligence briefings, historical texts, and defense white papers in front of us. And our mission is to extract the exact strategic frameworks you need to master this material.
And we are going to move systematically, focusing heavily on the underlying logic. Because, when you see a 15,000-kilometer missile test, you are looking at the very end result of a long, incredibly complex chain of geopolitical dominoes.
Right, the root causes.
Exactly. To understand that end result, you have to understand those root causes. So our core objective for this deep dive is to synthesize the economic metrics, the shifting defense doctrines, and the competing national objectives into one cohesive mental model for you.
Yeah, we aren't just memorizing facts today. We are looking at how geography dictates economics, how economics necessitates security, and how security eventually impacts domestic realities on the ground.
So to build that mental model, we have to start with the vocabulary. Words matter immensely in geopolitics. A term isn't just a label, it's a strategic weapon.
It really is. And the term Indo-Pacific has one of the most fascinating origin stories I've ever seen in our research. Like, if you ask a modern defense contractor where the term came from, they'd probably guess it was coined in some Pentagon basement, a few years ago.
Most people do.
Right. But the chronology actually goes all the way back to the 1920s.
Yeah.
We have to look at this German geopolitician named Karl Haushofer.
Yeah, and it is a remarkable piece of history. To understand Karl Haushofer's use of the term in the 1920s, you really have to look at the world through his eyes. Germany had just been devastated by World War I. They had lost their colonial possessions. Their naval power was crippled.
Because the world's oceans were entirely dominated by Western maritime hegemony, mostly the British Empire and the United States.
Precisely. Haushofer realized that whoever controlled the sea lanes essentially controlled the destiny of nations. But he also saw an opportunity for a massive structural shift.
So he looks at the map, right? And he sees these two massive colonized, or at least semi-colonized giants.
Wow.
India and China. And he conceptualizes the Indo-Pacific not just as a geographic region, but as a potential anti-colonial alliance.
Right. His original vision for the Indo-Pacific was an axis of Asian power. He theorized that, if India and China were to unite, their combined demographic, geographic, and economic weight could form this colossal anti-colonial force.
A force capable of breaking Western maritime dominance.
Exactly. And from his German perspective, this unified Asian bloc could serve as a vital counterweight and a potential ally for a resurgent Germany down the line.
I mean, that is just staggering when you think about the irony of it. Haushofer coins the term, dreaming of India and China teaming up to crush Western naval power. Cut to a century later, and the term Indo-Pacific is literally the primary organizing principle used by the West and India to counter the naval power of China.
It is the exact inverse of his dream.
The exact inverse. But, Haushofer's concept basically gathered dust in academic libraries for decades after that. The contemporary use, the version that actually moves aircraft carriers today, started in August 2007. And I want you to remember that date, August 2007. The setting was the Indian Parliament, and the speaker was Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Yes, Prime Minister Abe's speech is widely considered the true genesis of the modern Indo-Pacific strategic framework. He delivered this famous address titled Confluence of the Two Seas.
Great title, by the way.
Very poetic, but highly strategic. He didn't just walk up to the podium and invent a buzzword. He was articulating a profound shift in Japanese strategic anxiety. You see, Japan is heavily reliant on energy imports from the Middle East.
Right, the oil has to travel across the Indian Ocean, squeeze through the Strait of Malacca, and go up through the South China Sea into the Pacific.
And if you control that shipping lane, you essentially have Japan's economy by the throat.
Which is a terrifying prospect for Tokyo.
Precisely the fear. Abe recognized that you could no longer view the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as two distinct, separate theaters. China's growing influence and its naval capacity meant that those two bodies of water were bleeding into one continuous strategic space.
So by talking about the confluence, Abe was laying down a marker. He was telling India, hey, your security in the Indian Ocean and our security in the Pacific are fundamentally the exact same problem.
Right. But a speech by a visionary politician is still just a speech. It takes time for an idea to chew through the bureaucratic machinery of global governance.
Yeah, it took 6 years for that speech to turn into official state policy. So write this down. In 2013, the term Indo-Pacific made its first formal documented appearance in a state's defense doctrine. And that state was Australia, specifically in their 2013 Defense White Paper.
The Australian adoption is the crucial trigger event for institutionalizing this concept. If you look at Australia's geography, they sit literally at the fulcrum of the two oceans. Their western coast faces the Indian Ocean, and their eastern coast faces the Pacific.
They are the bridge.
Exactly. So when their defense establishment officially pivoted to the Indo-Pacific terminology in 2013, it signaled to the rest of the world that the old geographical boundaries were officially obsolete. And following Australia's lead, we also saw U.S. officials begin using a slight variation that same year, referring to the Indo-Asia-Pacific.
I want to pause here for a second because this evolution from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific often trips people up. It sounds like a minor rebranding, just swapping a word, but it completely changes who is in the room. Let me test an analogy on you to explain the mechanics of this shift.
Go for it.
So, if we look at the old term, the Asia-Pacific, or AP, it feels strictly institutional and geographically bounded. It's almost like a highly exclusive neighborhood association.
Yeah.
You have APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum.
Right.
And to be in that club, you have to live on the specific piece of real estate bordering the Pacific Ocean. So it includes Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. But it firmly shuts the gate at the Indian Ocean. Does that capture the AP framework?
That is an excellent way to visualize it, actually. The Asia-Pacific is a static concept. It was championed largely by the established economic powers of Asia and the U.S. to create a defined zone for trade and dialogue back in the late 20th century. It is bounded, it's measurable, and it's highly structured around institutions like APEC.
Right.
The problem with the Asia-Pacific framework, however, is that it completely ignores the actual flow of global trade and military power in the 21st century.
Yeah, which is why the Indo-Pacific feels less like a neighborhood association and more like this expanding tectonic plate. It's an evolving mega-region. It's not just a place. It is a strategic concept designed to manage the shift of global power from the west to the east.
And the boundaries are intentionally fuzzy.
Yes, it stretches all the way from the coast of East Africa, sweeps across the entire Indian Ocean, and encompasses the Western Pacific all the way to the Americas.
And that expansive geography is exactly why the United States officially weaponized the term. We saw the origins in 2007 with Abe, we saw the formalization in 2013 with Australia, but the true policy anchor dropped in 2019.
Ah, the FOIP document.
Yes. In 2019, the U.S. Department of State published a pivotal document formalizing the strategy of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And you will frequently see this abbreviated in the literature as FOIP.
FOIP document is really where the underlying logic surfaces. Like, why did the U.S. abandon the Asia-Pacific framework for the Indo-Pacific? The sources we have are incredibly blunt about this. It was to counter China's growing footprint.
Right. The strategic realization in Washington was that you just cannot contain or manage the rise of China if you are only looking at the Pacific Ocean.
Because they're already moving past it.
Exactly. You must integrate the Indian Ocean into your security architecture, because that is where China is actively building ports, expanding its naval presence, and securing its massive supply chains.
And the 2019 FOIP document also does something incredibly consequential. It explicitly linked the sustainment of this free and open region to the quadrilateral security dialogue, which we all know as the Quad.
Yes, the Quad, comprising the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. It basically became the primary vehicle for operationalizing this massive strategic theater.
And that brings us to a massive point of friction, and honestly, one of the most important takeaways from our research regarding the stakeholders and their motivations. Just because the U.S. and India are both in the Quad and both use the term Indo-Pacific does not mean they have the same objectives.
Not at all.
According to the intelligence briefings, the official positions are drastically different. For the United States, the Indo-Pacific is quite frankly understood as a U.S.-led containment strategy directed against Beijing.
Right. For Washington, the Indo-Pacific is fundamentally a theater of deterrence. The architecture is explicitly designed to prevent a single authoritarian state from establishing hegemony over the region.
But contrast that hardline containment posture with the official stance of New Delhi. India officially defines the Indo-Pacific not as an arena for containment, but as an enabler for a common pursuit of progress and prosperity.
And they take it a step further. India explicitly states that its concept of the Indo-Pacific is not directed against any country.
Right, they are very careful about that phrasing.
Very careful. They maintain it is based purely on a principled commitment to the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and the peaceful settlement of disputes.
This divergence is critical for you to understand. If you are drafting a policy memo or an exam answer on this, you must highlight this tension. The U.S. frames it negatively stopping China. India frames it positively enabling progress and the rule of law.
Yet they sit shoulder to shoulder in the Quad.
Exactly. How do we explain that? Well, we look at their converging strategic motivations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they might disagree on the brochure copy, but they completely agree on the plumbing.
The plumbing, I like that.
The Quad is an informal grouping of like-minded democracies, and what binds them together is maritime security and the protection of global supply chains. Whether you call it containment or the rule of law, the mechanical outcome they both want is exactly the same.
Which is ensuring that the vital sea lanes connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans remain open and free from unilateral coercion.
And we really must emphasize how deeply this shift impacts India specifically. Because under the old framework, the Asia-Pacific India was literally off the map.
Right, because India is not geographically part of the Pacific Rim, it was completely excluded from core institutions like APEC. It was just a spectator to the region's economic and security architecture.
So I want to make this very clear. India is not a part of the Asia-Pacific region. That is a hard fact you need to internalize. But India is a central pillar of the Indo-Pacific.
Exactly. The adoption of the Indo-Pacific terminology was a massive diplomatic victory for India. It moved New Delhi from the periphery to the dead center of the globe's most critical strategic theater.
And India isn't just enjoying the prestige, it is directing massive diplomatic and military attention to the region as a major actor in the 21st century.
But let's be realistic about why India is suddenly so focused. It's not just a sudden passion for oceanography, right? India's approach is dictated by a harsh new strategic reality. The intelligence texts cite China's growing aggression on both land and sea and its rapidly expanding footprint in the Indian Ocean region.
We are talking about border skirmishes in the Himalayas and Chinese submarines docking in Sri Lanka. This intense pressure is the root cause driving India's response.
And that response is perfectly encapsulated in its Act East policy.
Yes. The Act East policy is basically the operational arm of India's Indo-Pacific strategy. For decades, India had a Look East policy, which was largely about economic engagement with Southeast Asia.
Looking, but not really touching.
Exactly. But Act East is different. It is a robust, proactive integration with the economic and security networks of the Indo-Pacific. It is the strategic realization that to secure the Indian Ocean, India must be an active participant in the broader theater, balancing against the expanding Chinese footprint by building deep ties with like-minded democracies.
So we've covered the history, the terminology, and the geopolitical motivations. But why does any of this actually matter? Why are the world's superpowers risking open conflict over these specific waters?
It all comes down to the metrics of power.
Let's look at the hard data, starting with geoeconomics.
The economic implications of the Indo-Pacific validate its status as the center of gravity for the 21st century. Consider these figures. The region is home to 9 of the world's 10 busiest seaports. Let that sink in. 9 out of 10.
That is insane. And here's an even bigger number for you. 50% of all worldwide marine trade transits through Asia. Half of everything moving across the world's oceans goes through this region.
Furthermore, 1/3 of all global shipping travels through a single, highly contested body of water, the the South China Sea.
1/3, just through that one sea.
Yes, if you want to understand why freedom of navigation operations are so critical, it's because if someone locks down the South China Sea, they lock down a third of the entire global economy.
But the value isn't just in the surface transit, right? We also have to look at what lies beneath the water. The Indo-Pacific contains massive exclusive economic zones, or EEZs.
Right, EEZs. These are the areas of the ocean over which a state has special rights regarding the exploration and use of marine resources.
And the EEZs in the Indo-Pacific offer staggering potential. We are talking about unexploited energy reserves, critical minerals that are necessary for advanced technology, and massive fisheries that feed billions of people.
Whoever controls the EEZs controls the resources that will define the next 50 years of global growth.
Which logically leads us directly into the security implications, because where you have immense concentrated economic value,
You will inevitably find dense militarization designed to protect or capture that value. It is a direct cause and effect relationship.
yeah, the U.S. Department of Defense made this incredibly clear. In its 2019 strategy report, the DoD referred to the Indo-Pacific as the, and I'm quoting here, single most crucial area for America's future. Not Europe, not the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific.
And the military metrics prove why they said that. The Indo-Pacific area is home to 7 of the world's 10 largest standing militaries.
7 of the 10 largest armies, navies, and air forces are actively operating in this single overlapping theater.
But the most sobering metric of all is the nuclear dimension. 6 of the countries situated in the Indo-Pacific possess nuclear weapons.
Think about the sheer density of that friction. You have 50% of the world's trade, 9 of the top 10 ports, enormous untapped EEZ wealth, 7 of the top 10 militaries, and 6 nuclear-armed nations all maneuvering for dominance in the exact same waters.
It's a geopolitical powder keg.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the old global order, the traditional multilateralism built after World War II, it simply isn't equipped to handle this level of multipolar friction.
The sheer kinetic energy of the region is causing institutional breakdown. As you noted earlier, APEC effectively represents the economic side of the Asia-Pacific. But for security in the Indo-Pacific, there is no NATO.
Right.
There is no overarching formal treaty alliance that dictates collective defense.
Instead, there is the Quad, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. And the intelligence briefings explicitly state that the Indo-Pacific concept has a symbiotic link with the Quad.
Symbiotic is the perfect word. They feed off each other. The concept of the Indo-Pacific gives the Quad a geographical purpose, a theater to actually operate in.
And in return, the Quad gives the Indo-Pacific concept its strategic teeth. It turns a theory into joint naval exercises and intelligence sharing.
But here's where it gets highly sophisticated, particularly regarding India's balancing strategy. India understands that trying to match China ship for ship in a purely hard power arms race is an impossible and, frankly, dangerous game.
So India utilizes a dual-track strategy. Yes, they participate in Quad military exercises, but they also deploy highly targeted, proactive, diplomatic, and economic measures to build strategic depth.
I want to highlight a fascinating case study from the source material that perfectly illustrates this balancing strategy. On November 26, a major project implementation agreement, or PIA, was signed.
Right, this was between the Ministry of External Affairs, the MEA, and the International Solar Alliance, or ISA.
Exactly. The objective of this PIA is to execute new Indian-funded solar projects in 4 very specific Indo-Pacific countries. And you must commit these 4 to memory: Fiji, Comoros, Madagascar, and Seychelles.
Let's analyze the strategic logic of this move. Why is the Ministry of External Affairs funding solar panels in these specific locations?
Well, on the surface, the stated goals are purely developmental: to enhance energy access, create employment, and provide reliable, quality power in these nations. It also explicitly strengthens the Quad's stated commitment to addressing climate change and facilitating a transition to a clean energy economy.
Let me push back on this a bit, though, because it sounds almost a bit utopian. I mean, we just finished discussing a region packed with 7 massive militaries and 6 nuclear states preparing for potential war. And India's grand strategy is to build solar arrays in Fiji.
It sounds disjointed, right?
Yeah, like, how does climate leadership and clean energy actually translate into hard geopolitical leverage against an expanding superpower?
It is actually a brilliant piece of asymmetrical statecraft. Look at a map of the Indian Ocean. Comoros, Madagascar, and Seychelles are island nations situated right off the eastern coast of Africa.
They are the western gatekeepers of the Indian Ocean sea lanes.
Exactly. And Fiji holds a similarly critical position in the South Pacific. Now, these island nations don't need ballistic missiles. They face an existential threat from climate change and energy insecurity.
Oh, I see.
By stepping in through the MEA and ISA to provide decentralized, resilient solar infrastructure, India is establishing deep, enduring diplomatic leverage.
I see the mechanism now. It's soft power designed to block hard power. Like if China tries to pull these island nations into its orbit through predatory infrastructure loans or fossil fuel dependency under the Belt and Road Initiative, India is right there offering a cleaner, more sustainable alternative.
Precisely. And it proves that the Quad isn't just a military coalition obsessed with containing China. It shows it's a partnership that actually provides tangible public goods to the region.
It perfectly operationalizes India's vision of the Indo-Pacific as an enabler for progress and shared prosperity. It builds a coalition based on positive engagement rather than just mutual fear.
But as we know, soft power has its limits.
Yeah, solar panels can't intercept a ballistic missile.
And unfortunately not. And that brings us to the most alarming section of our intelligence stack, the new missile age in the Indo-Pacific.
We are watching the institutional frameworks we just discussed completely collapse under the weight of severe, unchecked military escalation.
The strategic environment is deteriorating at an unprecedented rate. What we are witnessing is the geographic contagion of institutional collapse, leading directly to a classic security dilemma.
And the most visceral data point for this escalation occurred in late September, right? When China's People's Liberation Army conducted an atmospheric test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, launching it deep into the Pacific Ocean.
Yes. I cannot overstate how aggressive this maneuver was. This was China's first known successful atmospheric ICBM test over international waters in 44 years.
Let that sink in. For over 4 decades, China kept its ICBM tests largely inland, testing over its own territory. The last time they fired one into international waters was 1980, with the DF-5 missile, which flew over 9,000 kilometers.
So by breaking a 44-year taboo, China is sending a blindingly clear signal.
And we must analyze the specific asset they chose to test. The missile fired in late September is identified as the DF-41. The technical specifications of this weapon are terrifying.
They really are. The DF-41 has a reported operational range of between 12,000 and 15,000 kilometers. By definition, ICBMs are designed to exceed a 5,500-kilometer range and are fundamentally built to carry nuclear warheads.
A 15,000-kilometer range means it can easily strike anywhere in the continental United States. So testing a nuclear-capable weapon of that magnitude over the ocean is Beijing telling Washington, we can reach you, and we are no longer hiding our capabilities.
But China's DF-41 test did not occur in a vacuum. It is part of a much broader regional cascade of escalation. Earlier in that same month of September, North Korea conducted multiple short-range ballistic missile tests, directing the launches toward the Sea of Japan.
Right, so you have North Korea flexing its short-range capabilities and China demonstrating its intercontinental reach simultaneously.
And the United States is absolutely not standing still. They are fundamentally altering their military posture in the region. In April, the U.S. deployed a mid-range capability missile system to the Philippines for joint military exercises.
The deployment of a mid-range missile system to the Philippines is a massive strategic trigger event because this is the first time the United States has deployed such a weapon in the Indo-Pacific since the signing of the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Universally known as the INF Treaty.
Right, the INF Treaty. We need to explore the mechanics of this to understand why it's so destabilizing. The INF Treaty was a landmark Cold War agreement between the U.S. and the erstwhile Soviet Union. Its terms were incredibly strict. It completely banned all land-based ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges between 500 kilometers and 5,500 kilometers.
The logic behind the INF Treaty was to eliminate a specific class of highly destabilizing weapons in Europe. Mid-range missiles have very short flight times. If one is launched, the adversary has mere minutes to decide whether it is a conventional strike or a nuclear first strike.
Which vastly increases the risk of accidental nuclear war.
Exactly. By banning them, the U.S. and Soviets removed a major hair trigger from the Cold War.
But the INF Treaty is now dead. In 2019, the United States formally withdrew from the agreement. The official reason cited was years of Russian violations regarding their own missile development.
However, the unstated but obvious geopolitical reality was that the U.S. felt its hands were tied, while China, which, remember, was never a signatory to the INF Treaty, was busy building a massive arsenal of mid-range missiles to dominate the Indo-Pacific.
What's fascinating here is how we see the interconnectedness of global security. A Cold War legal framework designed for the European theater collapses in 2019. The immediate result: the United States, no longer bound by the 500 to 5,500-kilometer ban, resumes development and deployment of these weapons.
And then they move a mid-range system right into the Philippines in April to counter China's naval dominance.
And China looks at U.S. missiles in the Philippines and responds by testing a 15,000-kilometer DF-41 ICBM over the ocean for the first time since 1980. It's an escalating loop. Action, reaction.
The collapse of a treaty in Europe has directly triggered a new missile age in the Indo-Pacific.
It really has. When you look at the complete strategic picture, the cause and effect chains are glaringly obvious. The geopolitics, the semantic shift from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific was driven by the raw economics, 50% of global trade and the wealth of the EZs.
Right. That immense economic density necessitated security arrangements, leading to the formalization of FOIP and the elevation of the Quad.
Those security arrangements created friction with China, prompting India to utilize a balancing strategy, deploying soft power ISI solar diplomacy in crucial island nations.
However, that soft power is now being overshadowed by hard power escalation following the collapse of the INF Treaty and the onset of unchecked missile proliferation.
Okay, we've just covered a massive amount of intelligence. Now we're going to pivot. If you were preparing for a high-stakes meeting, a boardroom briefing, or a strategic exam, just understanding the narrative isn't enough. You need to be able to deploy these concepts rapidly and authoritatively.
We are going to build your executive mental models.
Yes, I am going to walk you through exactly how to structure your arguments to convey total mastery of this topic, so grab a pen if you need to.
Let's begin with a micro framework. Imagine you have exactly 150 words to summarize the strategic significance of the Indo-Pacific. You must hit 3 specific beats.
First beat. Define the conceptual shift. Explain the transition from the geographically static Asia-Pacific, represented by APEC, to the strategically evolving Indo-Pacific, which is symbiotically linked to the Quad. Anchor this with the 2019 U.S. formalization of FOIP.
Second beat. Deploy the hard metrics. State unequivocally that the region handles 50% of global marine trade, hosts 9 of the top 10 seaports, and possesses massive EEZ resource potential.
Third beat. Pivot to the security reality. Note that it contains 7 of the top 10 militaries and 6 nuclear states. Conclude by framing the theater as defined by the tension between immense economic opportunity and the looming threat of the new missile age.
That is tight, dense, and hits every required analytical note.
Now, let's expand the model. If you are asked to provide a comprehensive 250-word analysis on the specific prompt, India's approach versus the new missile age, here is your structural blueprint.
Heading 1. The strategic catalyst. Start by explaining how China's expanding footprint in the Indian Ocean forced India's hand. India shifted from a peripheral player in the Asia-Pacific to a central pillar of the Indo-Pacific via its Act East policy.
Crucially, contrast India's vision of the region as an enabler for progress based on the rule of law against the U.S. vision of containment.
Heading 2. The balancing act. This is where you deploy the soft power data. Explicitly cite the November 26 project implementation agreement between the MEA and the ISA. You must name the 4 countries: Fiji, Comoros, Madagascar, and Seychelles.
Explain the mechanism, using clean energy funding to build diplomatic leverage and fulfill the Quad's climate goals, countering hard power coercion.
Heading 3. The hard power reality. Contrast that solar diplomacy with the deteriorating security environment. See the 2019 collapse of the 1987 INF Treaty.
Explain how that led to the U.S. deploying mid-range missiles to the Philippines, which triggered China's atmospheric test of the 15,000-kilometer DF-41 ICBM, its first over international waters in 44 years.
Conclusion. End with an analytical question. Can India's vision of a region governed by the rule of law survive an unchecked missile proliferation race?
Brilliant. To support these frameworks, you need the raw data at your fingertips. If you need to generate a rapid bullet point list of the core metrics, memorize this sequence.
Point 1. 50% of worldwide marine trade transits through Asia.
Point 2. 1/3 of all global shipping travels specifically through the South China Sea.
Point 3. The region is home to 9 of the world's 10 busiest seaports.
Point 4. It contains 7 of the world's 10 largest standing militaries.
Point 5. 6 regional countries possess nuclear weapons.
And if you are tasked with writing a comprehensive long-form essay on the Indo-Pacific, your intro-body conclusion structure should flow logically through the chronology and themes we discussed today.
Introduction. Hook the reader with the historical irony. Contrast Karl Haushofer's 1920s vision of an anti-colonial India-China alliance against Shinzo Abe's 2007 Confluence speech and Australia's 2013 formalization.
Body paragraph 1, geoeconomics. Lay out the trade density, the ports, and the strategic value of the EEZs.
Body paragraph 2, competing motivations. Analyze the friction within the Quad. Contrast the U.S. FOIP containment strategy with India's inclusive, progress-oriented vision.
Body paragraph 3, the balancing strategy. Detail India's asymmetrical response, the MEA and ISA solar projects in the island nations of the Indian and Pacific Oceans.
Body paragraph 4, the security dilemma. Break down the new missile age, focusing heavily on the collapse of the INF Treaty, U.S. regional deployments, and the DF-41 test.
Conclusion. Synthesize the core dilemma. Explain how the region's massive economic value makes militarization inevitable, requiring states to master a complex balance between soft power diplomacy and hard power readiness.
Finally, vocabulary is the ultimate signifier of expertise. When discussing this topic, you must integrate these specific keywords and administrative terms naturally into your analysis.
Here are the terms you need to underline. Act East Policy, Exclusive Economic Zones or EZZs, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, FOIP, Rule of Law, Symbiotic Link with the Quad, DF-41, INF Treaty, Project Implementation Agreement, PIA, Ministry of External Affairs, MEA, International Solar Alliance, ISA, and the U.S. Department of Defense Strategy Report 2019.
Using these exact terms demonstrates a deep, granular understanding of the source material.
All right, let's run a rapid mental stress test. I'm going to throw out the concept. You think of the data instantly. Ready? Let's go. The 1920s origin of the term.
Karl Haushofer's anti-colonial vision.
The 2007 trigger event.
Shinzo Abe's Confluence speech to the Indian Parliament.
The first formal defense articulation.
Australia's 2013 Defense White Paper.
The formalization of FOIP.
The 2019 U.S. State Department document.
The operational range of the DF-41.
12,000 to 15,000 kilometers, capable of striking the U.S.
The last Chinese ICBM tested over the ocean before this year.
The DF-5 in 1980. So 44 years ago.
The Collapsed Missile Treaty.
The 1987 INF Treaty, which banned 500 to 500 kilometer missiles, and from which the U.S. withdrew in 2019.
Excellent. Let's do one more layer of active recall. Think about the specific details we covered. I will ask the question directly to you, the listener, and I'll pause. You think of the answer.
First question. Which 4 specific Indo-Pacific countries are receiving the MEA and IS solar projects under the November 26 agreement?
Think about the islands.
Fiji, Comoros, Madagascar, and Seychelles.
Second question. What exact proportion of global marine trade transits through Asia?
The answer is 50%.
Third question. What is the core institutional difference between the Asia-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific regarding India's status?
India is entirely excluded from the Asia-Pacific architecture like APEC, but is a central defining pillar of the Indo-Pacific architecture and the Quad.
Perfect. Let's bring this all together into a final, highly concentrated revision capsule. The Indo-Pacific has evolved from a 1920s theory into the defining geographic reality of the 21st century. The shift away from the static Asia-Pacific was fundamentally driven by the need to integrate the Indian Ocean to manage China's rise.
The stakes are defined by the economics. 50% of global trade, 9 of the top 10 ports, and the vast wealth of the EEZs.
And this economic gravity pulls in military power, resulting in a region packed with 7 of the top 10 militaries and 6 nuclear states. To manage this, we see the formalization of FOIP and the rise of the Quad.
India, driven by its Act East policy to counter China's footprint, attempts a sophisticated balancing act, deploying ISA solar projects to island nations to build soft power resilience.
However, this diplomacy is currently being eclipsed by the collapse of the 1987 INF Treaty. With the U.S. moving mid-range missiles into the Philippines and China breaking a 44-year precedent by launching a 15,000-kilometer DF-41 ICBM into the Pacific, the region is plunging headfirst into a new missile age.
The cause and effect is absolute. Geopolitics dictates the economy demands security, and security dictates the ultimate survival of domestic policy.
We have mapped out the treaties, the geography, and the logic of escalation. But we want to leave you with a final analytical paradox to consider long after we wrap up this deep dive.
We discussed India's official objective for the Indo-Pacific, a region that acts as an enabler of progress, strictly governed by the rule of law and peaceful dispute resolution. It is a noble and frankly necessary vision, But if the legal frameworks that maintain peace, like the INF Treaty, continue to collapse, and the world's largest militaries are openly testing intercontinental nuclear-capable weapons over international waters, how can a vision based purely on the rule of law survive in an ocean increasingly defined by the rule of force?